Welcome to a deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount. Everyone's always asking about how to actually apply these teachings to life today.
Right.
So that's what this deep dive is all about. We've got this incredible source. And honestly, I was blown away by how relevant this ancient wisdom still feels.
Yeah, it's amazing how the text presents these teachings, not as rigid rules, but more like a pathway to a completely different way of being. And that's where I think the real challenge comes in, but also the excitement of it.
Yeah, no, totally. It's not about checking boxes, but about this inner transformation.
Yeah.
Which brings us to one of the most well-known teachings from the Sermon on the Mount. Being the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that whole salt metaphor was kind of cute, adding flavor and all. But this source really made me think about it in a whole new way.
Well, it really pushes us to examine what kind of impact we're having, on the world. If the world is like a dish that's going bad, are we just seasoning it a little? Or are we actually acting as a preservative? Something that can prevent decay.
That's a good point. It's not just about making things a little more palatable, but about really pushing back against negativity and corruption. And then there's that light metaphor. It's not about hiding your faith, but letting it shine so brightly that others can see their way. What really hit me in the source was how even small acts of kindness, little moments of encouragement, those things we often dismiss as insignificant. Those are all part of this light that we're called to radiate.
It's true. And those small acts, they may seem insignificant, especially in a world that's obsessed with grand gestures, but they can actually have a ripple effect. I mean, think about those social movements that start with just one person speaking out, or the way a simple act of kindness can totally change someone's day. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's like those viral videos where you see one person helping someone out,
Yeah.
and then it inspires a whole chain reaction of kindness. Maybe that's what spreading light looks like in the modern world. But here's where it gets really interesting. The source makes it clear that this light isn't even ours to begin with. It comes from God.
Exactly. And that really changes our perspective, doesn't it? If we're reflecting God's light, it's less about us taking credit and more about recognizing that we're just conduits, vessels. And that brings in a sense of humility, a recognition that we're part of something way bigger than ourselves.
Right, now for a teaching that's always given me pause, love your enemies. Honestly, when I first read that, I thought, it was a little unrealistic. How are you supposed to love someone who's hurt you or wants to harm you?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. There's no denying that. But the text presents this really radical idea of breaking the cycle of hatred, not with more hatred, but with compassion. And that compassion comes from a power beyond ourselves, from God.
And the example the text uses is really powerful. Jesus on the cross, forgiving the very people who put him there, talk about loving your enemies. But how do we even begin to apply that kind of radical forgiveness in our own lives, in those everyday situations?
Well, the text offers this surprising insight. Forgiving our enemies isn't just about them. It's about us. Holding on to all that resentment, the anger, the bitterness, it weighs us down. Forgiveness, even when it feels impossible, can actually free us from that burden. It can lead to inner peace.
So it's not about condoning their actions, but about releasing ourselves from that grip of negative emotions.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, a concept that I find really powerful is humility and poverty of spirit. It almost feels countercultural, doesn't it? In a world that's all about self-sufficiency and achievement. The Sermon on the Mount is telling us that true strength comes from recognizing our need for God.
It really is a total paradigm shift. We're conditioned to believe that having it all together, projecting an image of strength and success, that's the key to happiness. But the text suggests that it's actually the opposite. Emptying ourselves, admitting we don't have all the answers, that's the path to true fulfillment.
It makes me think about those times when I've achieved a goal or, gotten the promotion, checked all the boxes, and still felt like something was missing.
Yeah.
Could it be that this poverty of spirit, this surrender to something greater than ourselves, is what we're all secretly longing for?
That's such a profound question. And the text seems to suggest that this surrender, this recognition of our need for God, is what ultimately leads to that true satisfaction, that sense of wholeness that we can't find in external achievements alone.
Okay, let's move into a section that gets a little bit more abstract. Purity of heart and seeing God. This is where the text really pushes us to think beyond just avoiding bad behavior. It's about our inner world, our intentions, our motivations. It even suggests that we can see God in everything around us.
Yeah, and that's a really key point, because seeing God isn't about having some mystical vision or anything. It's about recognizing God's presence in the everyday, in the ordinary. It's about shifting our perspective, seeing the world through a lens of faith and wonder.
So instead of focusing on what's wrong with the world, we start to notice the beauty, the goodness, The interconnectedness of it all, I like that. But how does purity of heart, this inner alignment, how does that actually impact our daily choices?
That's a great question, and it's one that the text invites us to wrestle with. If we truly believe that God is present in all things, that every encounter, every decision is an opportunity to connect with the divine, does that change how we approach our work, our relationships, even just the mundane tasks of daily life?
Okay, now for a teaching that always throws me for a loop, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, meekness. Isn't that what doormats are for? But the text makes it clear that meekness is not weakness. It's more like controlled strength, inner peace in the midst of chaos. And then it uses Jesus as the example, which is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Right. Jesus facing incredible pressure, even persecution. He remained calm, compassionate, forgiving. That's meekness in action. And it's definitely not passive or submissive. It's about strength under control, a deep-rooted peace that the world can't shake.
And that inheritance part, it's not about getting a plot of land right. It seems like the text is talking about something much bigger, something more like the blessings of the kingdom of heaven. But what does that even look like? Peace, purpose, joy.
I think it encompasses all of that and more. It's about inheriting a way of being, a state of alignment with God's will that brings a sense of wholeness and fulfillment that goes way beyond the material world.
Okay, all this deep thinking is making me thirsty, which is perfect because the next teaching is all about thirst. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I love how visceral this one is. The text doesn't just talk about wanting things to be better. It evokes this deep, aching need for justice, for what's right.
It's like this primal longing, a hunger that can't be satisfied with anything less than true righteousness.
Yeah.
And what's so powerful is that the text promises that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they will be filled.
But filled with what exactly? Is it a sense of purpose, alignment with God's will, inner peace? Maybe it's all of those things all woven together. But it makes me wonder, how do we cultivate that kind of hunger, that thirst in our own lives?
Well, perhaps it starts with paying attention, allowing ourselves to really see the injustices around us, to feel that righteous anger, that indignation at what's wrong, and then channeling that energy into action, into working for change, into being a voice for the voiceless.
Okay, now for a teaching that reminds me of a boomerang mercy receiving mercy. We show mercy to others, and in turn we receive mercy from God. But the text is clear that it's not transactional, like some cosmic vending machine.
Exactly. It's not about keeping score or earning points. It's about reflecting God's character who shows us mercy every single day, whether we deserve it or not.
It's like that saying, there but for the grace of God go I. We all mess up. We all fall short. And recognizing that shared human experience, I think that makes it easier to extend that same grace to others.
And the text emphasizes that showing mercy isn't just about impacting others. It's about changing us from the inside out. The more we practice mercy, the more we become merciful people.
Okay, time to get real for a second. We all get angry sometimes,
Yeah.
right? It's a normal human emotion. But what I appreciate about the Sermon on the Mount is that it doesn't just tell us to be nice. It asks a really important question. What do we do with that anger? Because unchecked, it can be a destructive force.
And the text highlights a very real danger when we're judgment. When anger takes over, it's like we put on these blinders, We only see the other person's faults. We miss our own. We lose perspective and the ability to be fair.
It's like that saying, when you point a finger, there are three pointing back at you.
Yeah.
And what's the antidote to this judgment-fueled anger?
The text is very clear. Reconciliation, addressing the issue before that anger takes root and starts poisoning everything. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. It says seek resolution. Seek understanding.
Okay, this next teaching might feel a little intense, so we'll handle it with sensitivity. It's about adultery of the heart. Now, at first glance, it seems like this is just about avoiding physical infidelity. But the text goes way deeper than that. It's challenging us to examine our thoughts and desires, our inner world.
It's a pretty radical concept, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with images and messages that can easily lead us down the wrong path. The text uses some strong imagery, talking about cutting off what causes us to stumble. And that really made me think about all the choices we make, the things we allow into our minds, through social media, entertainment, even our own imaginations. It's a constant battle.
It really is. And the text doesn't sugarcoat it. It says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Now, obviously, that's not a literal instruction, but it highlights the seriousness of this inner battle and the need to be really ruthless in guarding our hearts and minds.
And the text also emphasizes that this isn't a battle we can win on our own. We need God's help to overcome temptation, to purify our hearts, to align our desires with his will.
Okay, Moving on to a teaching that might seem pretty straightforward, but has some really profound implications. Oaths and honesty. The text basically says that our yes should be yes and our no should be no. No need for elaborate oaths or guarantees if we're truly living with integrity.
It's about letting our lives speak for themselves, about being people whose word can be trusted. And that kind of trustworthiness is absolutely essential for strong relationships, both personal and professional.
I think we've all been in situations where someone's word just didn't feel like enough.
Yeah.
Like they needed to swear on something to convince us they were telling the truth. Maybe those situations were actually a symptom of a deeper lack of trust that was already there.
That's a really insightful observation, because if our actions consistently align with our words, if we're known for our honesty and integrity, those extra assurances become completely unnecessary.
It's like building a reputation for honesty brick by brick. People know they can count on you, that your word is your bond. Okay, next up is a teaching that calls us to be more than just passive bystanders. It's about being active peacemakers, working to build bridges, reconcile differences, and promote harmony in a world that often feels so divided.
And what's really powerful is how the text connects this to our identity as children of God. If God is the ultimate peacemaker, then by striving to create peace in our own lives and in the world around us, we're reflecting his very nature.
I love that. It makes me think about those times when I've avoided conflict, maybe just to keep the peace, but not really addressing the underlying issues. That's not true peacemaking, is it?
No, it's more like sweeping things under the rug. True peacemaking takes courage. It takes humility, and it takes a willingness to engage with those difficult conversations, to seek understanding even when it's uncomfortable.
Right. It's not about papering over those differences, but about engaging with them in a way that leads to genuine reconciliation and understanding. And the text makes it clear that this call to be peacemakers, it goes way beyond our personal relationships. It's about working for justice, speaking out against oppression, creating a world where peace is possible for everyone.
And that can be risky business, especially when we're going against the grain, challenging the status quo. But the text offers this incredible reward for those who take on this challenge. Peacemakers will be called children of God. What a powerful affirmation.
Okay, this next teaching is a bit more sobering. It's about persecution for righteousness' sake. And the text is upfront about the fact that following Jesus, living out his teachings, won't always be easy. Sometimes it will lead to opposition, misunderstanding, even outright persecution.
And it's important to acknowledge that persecution can take many different forms, It's not always dramatic or violent. Sometimes it's that subtle pressure to conform, to compromise our values in order to fit in or avoid rocking the boat.
Right? It can be as subtle as a raised eyebrow or a snide comment, or as overt as being ostracized or discriminated against. But whatever form it takes, the text doesn't shy away from the reality that standing up for what's right, following our conscience, can come at a cost.
But it also offers this powerful promise. Those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake will inherit the kingdom of heaven. It's like saying that the suffering we experience in this life pales in comparison to the reward that awaits us.
That's such a powerful image. It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that our suffering has meaning, and that ultimately justice will prevail. Okay, this next section of the text is for anyone who's ever experienced loss, who's ever felt the weight of grief. And what I appreciate about this teaching is that it doesn't offer platitudes or easy answers. It simply says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted."
And the comfort it speaks of isn't just about receiving kind words or hugs from friends and family. It's about experiencing God's presence, his deep, abiding love that sustains us even in our darkest moments.
It's that feeling of knowing you're not alone, even when you feel utterly broken. The text suggests that God's comfort is this peace that transcends understanding, a strength that carries us through when we feel like we can't go on.
And what's interesting is how the text connects mourning to growth. It implies that experiencing loss, while incredibly painful, can actually lead to greater compassion, a deeper understanding of the human condition, a more profound relationship with God.
It's like that saying, the cracks are where the light gets in. Sometimes it's through our deepest pain that we experience the most profound growth. Okay, the last teaching we're going to explore in this section is about the fulfillment of the law. And what I find so fascinating is that the text isn't saying we should just chuck the rule book out the window. It's about understanding the deeper purpose behind the rules.
It's about moving beyond simply following the letter of the law and embracing the spirit of the law. And that spirit is rooted in love, justice, and inner transformation.
Exactly. It's about asking ourselves, are we just going through the motions, following the rules out of fear or obligation? Or are we truly living out these teachings in a way that reflects God's heart, that embodies love, compassion, and mercy?
And the text emphasizes that Jesus himself is the ultimate fulfillment of the law, which raises an important question. What does that mean for us practically? How does his life, his example, inform our own pursuit of righteousness?
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount. From salt to suffering, from humility to honesty, from anger to adultery of the heart. These teachings challenge us to live differently, to see the world through a different lens. And while we've only scratched the surface, I'm already feeling the weight of these words, their power to transform.
It is a lot to take in, for sure. And it's not about achieving perfection overnight, but about starting where we are, taking one step at a time on this journey of transformation.
So before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, take a moment to reflect on what's resonated with you most so far. What teaching has really grabbed your attention? What question has lingered in your mind? We'll come back to those thoughts as we continue exploring the timeless wisdom of the Sermon on the Mount.
Welcome back. It's really something how these teachings from so long ago, can still feel so relevant to our lives today.
Well, right? And it's not just about feeling inspired. It's about figuring out how to actually put these teachings into practice. One that I keep coming back to is the one about anger. I mean, we all experience it. The Sermon on the Mount really challenges us to deal with it in a way that's constructive, not destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get swept up in anger and just let it control our thoughts and actions. But the text reminds us that we actually have a choice. We can either let that anger consume us, or we can choose to respond differently.
The source really highlighted that connection between anger and judgment. When we're angry, it's like we lose the ability to see things clearly, to be fair and compassionate.
It's like we're suddenly looking through a distorted lens. Everything seems wrong. Everyone's motives are suspicious. We're so quick to condemn. The text warns us about the danger of this kind of judgment-fueled anger because it can lead to rash decisions, hurtful words, damaged relationships.
And the antidote? Well, the source pointed to reconciliation. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, it says. Which honestly is easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. It takes humility, a willingness to let go of our pride, and a genuine desire to restore harmony. But the text offers a really practical suggestion. If you have something against someone, go and be reconciled with them. Don't let that anger fester and grow.
It's like choosing to weed the garden of your heart before the resentment takes over.
Okay.
Let's talk about a teaching that can feel a little uncomfortable, but is so important. Adultery of the heart. I used to think this was just about physical infidelity, but the source made it clear that the Sermon on the Mount goes much deeper than that. It's challenging us to examine our thoughts, our desires, our inner world.
It's a pretty radical concept when you think about it, because it's saying that sin doesn't begin with the outward act, but with the inward thought. And in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with images and messages that can lead us down the wrong path, this teaching feels more relevant than ever.
It's like you were living in this digital age of temptation, or constantly exposed to things that can spark those unhealthy desires.
Yeah.
The source used some pretty strong imagery to drive this point home. Talking about cutting off what causes us to stumble, it really made me think about the choices we make every day. The things we allow into our minds through social media entertainment, even our own imaginations. It's a constant battle.
It is. It's about being mindful of what we're feeding our minds and hearts. Recognizing that even seemingly innocent things can lead us down a slippery slope if we're not careful. The text reminds us that we're engaged in this constant battle for purity of heart. And it's not a battle we can win on our own.
The source was very clear about that. We need God's help to resist temptation, to purify our hearts, to align our desires with his will. Okay, moving on to a teaching that might seem simple on the surface, but actually has some pretty profound implications. Oaths and honesty. The Sermon on the Mount basically says that our word should be our bond. No need for fancy oaths or guarantees if you're truly living with integrity.
It's about letting our actions speak louder than words. About being people whose honesty and trustworthiness are unquestionable. And that kind of integrity is just foundational for any strong relationship, whether it's personal or professional.
So think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's word just didn't feel like enough, like they needed to swear on something to make you believe them? That really says something about the state of trust, doesn't it?
It does. And the text suggests that if our actions consistently line up with our words, if we're known for being truthful and reliable, those extra assurances become totally unnecessary.
It's like building a reputation for honesty brick by brick. People know they can count on you, that your word is your bond. Okay, next up is a teaching that calls us to be more than just passive bystanders. It's about being active peacemakers, taking initiative to build bridges, reconcile differences, promote harmony in a world that's often full of conflict and division.
What I found really powerful about this teaching was how it connected peacemaking to our identity as children of God. If God is the ultimate source of peace and reconciliation, then by striving to create peace in our own lives and in the world around us, we're reflecting his very nature.
I love that. It makes me think about all those times when I've avoided conflict, not because I genuinely wanted peace, but because I was afraid to rock the boat. That's not true peacemaking, is it? It's more like conflict avoidance.
It is. It's like sweeping things under the rug instead of actually addressing the underlying issues. And true peacemaking, it's not always easy. It takes courage, humility, and a willingness to engage with those difficult conversations, to seek understanding, even when it's uncomfortable.
The source challenged us to think about what peacemaking looks like on a broader scale. It's not just about resolving personal conflicts, but about working for justice, speaking out against oppression, creating a world where peace is possible for everyone.
And that can be risky, especially when we're challenging the status quo, standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. But the text offers this incredible reward for those who take on this challenge. Peacemakers will be called children of God. It's such a powerful affirmation.
Okay, this next teaching is a little more sobering. It's about persecution for righteousness' sake. And the Sermon on the Mount doesn't sugarcoat it. Following Jesus, living out his teachings can come at a cost. Sometimes it leads to opposition, misunderstanding, even outright persecution.
And it's important to acknowledge that persecution can take many different forms. It's not always about these dramatic acts of violence or oppression. Sometimes it's just that subtle pressure to conform, to compromise our values so we can fit in or avoid making waves. Right? It can be as simple as a dismissive comment or a raised eyebrow or that feeling of being excluded, But whatever form it takes, the text doesn't shy away from the reality that standing up for what's right, following our conscience, can sometimes make us a target.
But it also offers a powerful promise.
Yeah.
Those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, they will inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
It's like saying that the suffering we experience in this life, it's temporary. It pales in comparison to the reward that awaits us.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that our suffering has meaning, and that ultimately God's justice will prevail.
It's a source of hope and strength for those who are facing opposition or persecution for simply trying to live out their faith. Okay, this next section is for anyone who's ever experienced loss, who's felt that weight of grief and sorrow. It's about mourning and comfort. And what I appreciate about this teaching is that it doesn't offer platitudes or easy answers. It simply says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." It acknowledges the pain, the rawness of grief, without trying to minimize it or rush the healing process. And the comfort it speaks of, it goes beyond just human consolation. It's about experiencing God's presence, his deep, abiding love that sustains us even in those darkest moments.
It's that sense of knowing you're not alone, even in the depths of your sorrow, that there's a power greater than yourself that's holding you, carrying you through.
The source made an interesting connection between mourning and growth. It suggested that experiencing loss, while incredibly painful, can actually lead to greater compassion. A deeper understanding of the human condition, a more profound relationship with God.
That's like those kintsugi bowls, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, and it makes it even more beautiful and valuable. Sometimes it's through our deepest wounds that we experience the most profound transformation.
Okay, the final teaching we'll explore in this section is about the fulfillment of the law. And what struck me was that the Sermon on the Mount isn't saying we should just toss the rule book out the window. It's about understanding that deeper purpose behind the rules, the spirit that animates them.
It's about moving beyond that legalistic checklist approach to faith, and embracing a way of life that's rooted in love, justice, and inner transformation. It's about asking ourselves, are we just going through the motions, or are we truly allowing these teachings to shape our hearts and our minds?
The source emphasized that Jesus himself is the ultimate fulfillment of the law, which raises the question, what does that mean for us? How do we live in light of that truth?
It's about recognizing that Jesus didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it, to show us what it truly means to live in right relationship with God and with each other. And that's a lifelong journey of learning and growing, striving to embody his love and compassion in all that we do.
Wow. We've covered so much ground in this part of our deep dive, from anger and forgiveness to purity of heart and peacemaking. These teachings, they really challenge us to think differently, to act differently, to become more like Christ.
And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I invite you to consider which of these teachings is speaking to you most powerfully right now, Which one is stirring something within you? Which one is challenging you to step outside of your comfort zone and embrace a new way of being? Hold on to that thought as we continue our exploration.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
Yeah.
Into the Sermon on the Mount. We've been unpacking some pretty profound stuff. And this source has really got me thinking about what it truly means to follow Jesus,
Yeah, it's not about those easy answers or simple formulas. It's about wrestling with these teachings, letting them challenge us and transform us.
Totally. And speaking of transformation, the next teaching we're going to look at is all about surrender. It's that idea of being poor in spirit, recognizing our need for God, admitting that we don't have all the answers, which honestly goes against so much of what our culture values,
It really is a radical idea in a world that's all about self-sufficiency and, never showing weakness. Right. The Sermon on the Mount just turns that whole idea upside down. It says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."
It's like saying that true strength comes from acknowledging our limitations.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we weren't meant to go through this thing called life alone.
Right.
It's about surrendering our ego, our need to be right, our desire for control. And honestly, I don't know about you, but that's a message I need to hear again and again.
Me too. It's just so easy to get caught up in that hustle, the striving, the need to prove ourselves. But this teaching brings us back to reality. We were created for dependence, for connection, for relationship with God.
It's about letting go of that illusion that we can do it all on our own, and embracing the truth that we need help, we need grace, we need a power greater than ourselves. Let's dive into a teaching that's all about perspective, purity of heart, and seeing God. This one goes beyond just avoiding outward sin. It's about cultivating this inner landscape that reflects God's goodness and beauty. It's about seeing the world through a lens of faith and wonder.
It's about recognizing God's presence, not just in the extraordinary, but in those everyday moments, the ordinary stuff. It's about finding that beauty in the simple things, meaning in the mundane, and purpose in the challenges we face.
And the text makes this incredible promise. It says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Now, it's not about having some kind of mystical vision or anything.
Okay.
It's something deeper than that.
It is. It's about having those spiritual eyes opened, seeing the world as God sees it, recognizing his fingerprints everywhere.
It's like putting on a new pair of glasses. And suddenly we're seeing the world in a whole new light. We're seeing the interconnectedness of all things, and we're able to appreciate the beauty that's often hidden in plain sight. Okay. Now, for a teaching that I've always kind of struggled with a little, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. I used to think meekness was all about being passive or submissive, but this source helped me to see it in a whole new light.
Yeah, it's definitely not about weakness or timidity. The text uses Jesus himself as like the ultimate example of meekness. And Jesus was anything but passive, He was this powerful teacher, a healer, a revolutionary who challenged the status quo and stood up for those on the margins.
So if true meekness isn't about being a pushover, what is it about? What does it actually look like?
It's about strength under control, humility, not needing to prove yourself or assert your dominance. It's about that inner peace that can't be shaken by, external circumstances. And the text suggests that it's that kind of meekness that ultimately inherits the earth.
And that inheritance part is really interesting. It's not about just inheriting land, right? It seems like it's pointing to something much bigger. Something like the blessings of the kingdom of God. What does that actually look like?
I think it includes all the things that make life truly meaningful and fulfilling. Peace, joy, love, purpose, a deep connection with God and with others. It's about inheriting a way of being, a state of shalom that goes beyond the material world.
Okay. All this deep thinking is making me thirsty, which is perfect.
Yeah.
Because the next teaching is all about thirst, hunger and thirst for righteousness. This one really hits home for me because it's not just about wanting things to be better. It's about this deep gut-level need for justice.
Yeah, it's a longing that goes beyond just wanting fairness for ourselves. It's a yearning for the world to reflect God's heart, for his righteousness to be established in every corner of creation.
And what's amazing is that the text doesn't just acknowledge this hunger. It actually promises that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will be filled. But what does that filling actually look like? What are we being filled with?
Well, it's not about getting everything we want or seeing all the injustices in the world disappear overnight, It's about this deeper kind of satisfaction that comes from aligning ourselves with God's will, from being part of his redemptive work in the world. It's about experiencing the peace that comes from knowing we're on the right side of justice, even when the road is long and hard.
This next teaching reminds me of a boomerang. Mercy, receiving mercy. We show mercy to others, and in turn we receive mercy from God. But it's not transactional, right? It's not about earning points or keeping score.
Exactly. It's about reflecting God's character. God who shows us mercy every single day, whether we deserve it or not.
It's about recognizing that we're all in need of mercy. We all make mistakes. We all fall short. And when we extend that same grace to others, it not only impacts them, it changes us.
It does. The source really highlighted that. It's like breaking this cycle of judgment and condemnation and replacing it with a cycle of forgiveness and compassion. And I think that's what sets the world right, one merciful act at a time.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount. We've talked about surrender, seeing the world with new eyes, hungering for righteousness, being peacemakers, showing mercy. And it's clear that these teachings are about so much more than following rules or checking boxes. They're about this radical transformation of the heart, a way of life that reflects God's character.
It's about letting these teachings shape not just what we do, but how we think, what we desire, our very being. It's about becoming more like Christ in every aspect of our lives.
It's about embracing that upside-down kingdom that Jesus talked about, a kingdom where the first are last, the meek inherit the earth, and those who mourn find comfort. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What's one small step you can take today to put these teachings into action? How can you live out this Sermon on the Mount in your own unique way? Maybe it's offering a kind word to a stranger, extending forgiveness to someone who's hurt you, or just taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of God's creation. Even the smallest act of love and kindness can make a difference.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep letting your light shine.